Election Whisperer, and I am so excited to introduce my episode 2 guest. I just haven't been able to stop talking about how excited I am to have Rick Wilson, the genius brain behind the Lincoln Project ads and longtime evil henchman for the GOP, now completely on the side of the decent, the army of the decent, helping the army of the decent beat Donald Trump using his great talents to that effect. So I'm excited to have him on. We're going to talk a little bit about the lean, mean GOP campaign machine, which Rick is part of the major architects of. It's just absolutely incredible how the GOP does electioneering. I often tell people, when you look at Republican electioneering or campaign strategy, it's like watching one team play master chess, and then you look over at the Democrats and they're playing for a Connect Four. So I'm really excited to kind of illustrate what that means, and to do so by having Rick tell you a little bit about how they do it. Hi, Rick. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Rachel. Thanks so much for having me. And I just want to say, I love the fact that you're doing something where we can truly get in the weeds.
Yes. I mean, that's one thing, like I said, you know what, if people don't watch it all the way through, the show isn't for them anyway. This is for the wonks who really want to figure stuff out, and you can't explain things in 2 minutes. It's just not possible. So we're going to just go ahead and make a show for the few smart people out there who really care and want to know how things work. So you go ahead and tell us a little bit about so here, let me put it this way. You go back to your days as a Republican strategist. It wasn't that long ago, but, I guess it's probably starting to feel like it was. And your job was to beat, a Democratic Senate candidate or a Senate incumbent especially. Tell us how the GOP goes about running an election against a Democratic Senate incumbent.
Well, there's a couple of basic fundamentals that I always held after 30 years of experience doing this. One is the Democrats are holistically bad at politics. Now, they are sometimes great at one thing, like candidate recruitment, or sometimes great at raising money, or sometimes great at running a field operation. But, it's like the old military cliche. You can have it fast, cheap, or effective. Which one? Pick two, okay? So the Democrats rarely fire on all the cylinders at one time. And that's something that Republicans learned to exploit very quickly, starting back in the 1980s. And the long march from Republicans in the post-Watergate era, in part depended on running operational campaigns that did what they had to do, not what you thought they should do, not what you dreamed they would do. And part of that is just going out and doing the nuts and bolts work in the field, going out and doing the voter reg, going out and doing the voter contact, going down and beating down their doors on absentee and early voting, doing all the mechanical things, but also picking candidates who fit in their districts. Now, that is less the case now because of redistricting and because of the sort of Trump era we're in. But for a long time, we would go out and find a Republican who could win in, I don't know, California or Vermont or Massachusetts. And in those cases, those guys weren't ideologically perfect Republicans, but no one tried to kill them off at the national level. Okay. These days, you've got guys like Connor Lamb who go out there, and half the Democratic caucus is like, we're not even going to talk to that guy. Why? If he can win, who cares? He's not perfect on guns or abortion or whatever. So picking those candidates that fit in a state or a district is something that Republicans were willing to do for a long time. But the final thing, really, when it comes down to media and messaging, there's a 2 points inside of the media and messaging column you really should know. Republicans do not give a fuck what you think about them. They cannot be shamed. They cannot be lectured. They cannot be humiliated by anything. When I was on the other side of this, I was called everything in the book, every insult in the book, that I was horrible, that I attacked people, with cruel and terrible acts. Who fucking cares? Was the rule, okay? You go at the target. You don't care what they say about you. You recognize that you're not having a dialogue with other political consultants or the press. You're talking to the voters. And so just the power of not giving a shit was important.
I was going to ask you just to drill down on two things that you brought up in this first part. So you said like when your voter targeting thing, this absentee and early voting thing, to me, that sounds like you're talking about a particular kind of voter. Sounds to me like you're talking about Republican voters, right? Not,
Well,
so
you're not just Republican voters. You're also talking about states like Florida that have a very high percentage of independent and non-party affiliated voters.
Okay.
Third party independent, we call it just the overall NPA, non-major party affiliated voters.
Okay.
In Florida, we learned that you could activate those people. About 62% of the time, they would vote Republican, and all other things being control forever, all the crazy externalities, and about 62% of the time, those people would vote Republican. And so you want to seek them out, you want to identify them, you want to find an issue cluster that they respond to. You want to find a way to push that issue cluster as far and as fast and as hard as you can in your absentee ballot chase, in your absentee ballot and early voting chase. You really want to push those people hard because they tend to be behaviorally amenable to a Republican-leaning message.
Okay. And
for a long time, Democrats didn't do it. They thought, we're going to turn our voters out on election day.
Okay.
We're going to turn them out. We're going to get the buses and the transpo, and we're going to get everything worked out. We're going to motivate the souls to the polls. We're going to motivate the liberal activists in the condos in Palm Beach. This one election day push was always a huge gamble. And I don't think they ever really realized how much of a gamble it represented, because it's like a startup company, okay? Any campaign is like a startup. You want to do this amazing thing and get people to buy your app, to get on, to sign on to your app. Well, if you start doing it 6 or 8 weeks in advance, you can adjust. You can play with it. You can say, this message went out and we A/B tested, and this group of people, 40% return their absentees. In this group, 18%. So you do more of the A and less of the B. And because of that, you always want to be chasing them. And I want to say this about the president's objection to mail-in voting.
Mm-hmm.
The big objection to it that they seem to be putting out there, it's wrought with fraud. Every Republican Party in this country, every single state party, the National Party and the Trump campaign, they are all actively pursuing early and absentee voters by mail voting.
Yeah, because that's what I wanted to ask you about. Because, all right, so the reason I brought up and kind of honed in when you said, you were doing this targeting and you were talking about early voting and absentee voting is because, like, my impression, and this was, coming back to like when I was in graduate school, so I'm just some schmo watching elections, and I'm looking at places like Florida where, prior to DeSantis, you had Rick Scott in office, and, demographically, Florida has more registered Democrats, as we've looked at we're going to look at on the show, and should be a good place for Democrats to win. But when I look at exit polling data, the first thing that I always look at is the partisan breakdown of the electorate, and I always noticed, wow, you get these crazy turnout rates for Republicans. Like, how are they doing it? And then, as I started to research it, I realized, it's through early vote absentee balloting, right? And so when I ended up becoming a forecaster and get the opportunity to meet people like you, like when I was like on Michael Steele's podcast, I asked him about things that I could ask to verify that I had thought about. So the first thing I asked you is like, hey, is it just me, or did they set up like their early vote operation to ensure really high turnout, especially of Republicans, but as you just pointed out, non-affiliates that break Republican? Because like when you look in the voter file, you seeing like 70, sometimes above 70% turnout rates of those Republican voters. So they're getting, there may be less of them, but they're getting these huge participation rates. And what you're saying is basically it's this Republican electioneering approach that they've been doing for 15, 20 years that really emphasizes not same day voting, but this long game of early voting infrastructure.
That is precisely correct.
Okay.
Look, especially because I kind of grew up in Florida politics. Okay. Gigantic state, 14 media markets, and 5 of them are in the top 20 in the country. This is a huge
expensive
place.
Right? Isn't it also really expensive? Yeah.
Hideously expensive. To be on the air in Florida right now with a message that penetrates on a combination of digital, cable, and broadcast that actually voters will really see in Florida.
Right.
It's about $2 million a week.
Wow. It's amazing.
That's real money. So when the Republicans were coming up, and it goes way back to 1994, when the party chairman, a guy named Tom Slade, who was this two-fisted, hard-drinking, shit-talking guy, was the party chairman. He had a couple guys put together a plan called Operation Sledgehammer.
Okay.
And Sledgehammer was basically a 20-year long march through the Democratic Party's institutions and ability to win in the state.
Okay.
And it focused on voter reg for Republicans, which we did for a long time, very aggressively. Now, that actually stopped in the mid-2000s, late 2000s, but that's a whole separate story. And working up programs to do absentee ballot and early vote chase. Now, we didn't have a lot of early voting when that started. We had absentee, but it's a no-fault absentee state. You can ask for absentee ballot for whatever reason. So we chased ABS for a long time.
And I was under the impression like the state party there mails out like a ballot request to all the registered Republicans, right? So
it's not just every registered Republican, it's also people that we track from the voter file.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's some brilliant shit right there, right? I mean, that's how you get it done, dude.
Yeah. And look, and I was always on the media side of things and the comms, and the strategic comms side of things. But all the guys that built this program basically established best practices for the rest of the Republican state parties. The Republican Party of Florida is the best run
I tell everybody
the best run Republican Party in the country.
Yeah, brilliant. And also shitting their pants because Donald Trump is like basically taking their entire operation and making it like turning it into a villain, right? Like the voters hearing, don't do this thing that has helped the Florida GOP dominate Florida politics for 20 years, right? Right.
This is a real challenge for them right now. A few months ago, the Trump campaign went to the RPOF and said, we want to take control of everything. We want all your money, all your resources, all your people, do what we want, and also hire a bunch of our people as consultants. And even in the Trump era, the holdovers at the party were like,
hell no,
that's not great. And they all run these programs. There are some very smart consultants that run these programs.
Oh, I'm sure.
They do not, and by the way, these are not sophisticated policy fights in these absentee chase programs. This is, they're coming to take your guns. They're coming to raise your taxes.
Oh yeah, no, that's the shit that works. It's sophistication that kills the Democrats, right? I mean, that's why they go out there with these messages that are for people with, fucking graduate degrees.
Someone sent me a Democratic mailer a couple of years ago, and every line it had like 15 bullet points on it.
Oh my God!
Read our policy plan for clean water. Read this.
Like that. I'm doing a whole special episode on that bullshit, Rick. You're gonna love it.
But Rachel, here's the great thing about it. It's a mail piece, okay?
No doubt.
And it's got long, complicated URLs for each plan printed on a mail.
I know. And you know what? They use these consultants too. Like these people are cashing in these checks, like ba-cha-ching. They don't give a shit if these people win. And then they'll be like, oh, well, we tried this strategy and it didn't work, And it's like, yeah, because you sent them this piece of shit mailers. Like, dude, no wonder it didn't work.
Look, they've had some victories in the state.
Yes, they have. And there are some good things. Like there are definitely great things. And the Democrats have made some recent, adaptions, and I don't want to. And we're going to be talking about them next week. By the way, as a shameless plug, next week I'm having Ben Wickler on the show, architect of the Democrats' coup up there in Wisconsin, despite the pandemic when they won the state Supreme Court race. And spoiler alert, a lot of it was early vote investment. Even before the pandemic came in, Wickler put a lot of attention on early voting. So just to kind of give a shameless plug there. Go on, Rick.
I mean, look, if I were the Democrats, what I would be doing right now in early voting communication, I would find you always think never go to your enemy and ask them to do something. But if I were the Democrats in every state, I would spin up the Trump 2020 election integrity PAC or whatever,
Right.
And I would drop mail to Republicans saying, the president has said, do not vote by mail.
No doubt. Oh, I would too.
These are dangerous things. You should not do them. Donald Trump says, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. No doubt. Well, but if I was running the D-Trip or DNC, the first thing I would have done when, Michael Steele and Rick Wilson fled the ship is I would have been like, hey, here's a big fat check. Come work for me too. Yeah. But so
well, we're a we're
now you're a super PAC. Now you can't.
So now I can't talk to the I can talk to the parties.
Yeah.
I can talk to a lot of the parties involved, but I can't talk to the Biden campaign.
Yeah. But you spent a long time in free agency, right? Before the Lincoln Project came along.
Sure.
Yeah, and you know what? That's probably a good time to segue a little bit into Lincoln. I mean, Lincoln, when did you guys create the Lincoln Project?
Well, we started talking in the fall of last year. And when Reed Galen and John Weaver and Steve Schmidt and I started this conversation, several things were much different than they are today. The first one was it looked like there was a real possibility Bernie Sanders would be the nominee.
Yes, right.
And none of us were particularly sanguine about that prospect because that would have been a much higher hill to climb. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump desperately wanted, they spent money.
Yes.
Bernie was their pick. They wanted to run against an 800-year-old socialist and make this election a policy choice rather than a referendum on the incumbent.
Oh, now, yes, definitely.
All re-elections, unless the other side hands you the sword to cut off their head, are a referendum on the incumbent.
Yeah.
And so,
not when you run against the Democrats, because here's the thing. I think the Democrats can keep the message of referendum on Donald Trump now because it's Biden and because there's a pandemic that's killed, probably almost 250,000 Americans by the time we get to the fall, and because the economy's collapsed. I think that is enough to discipline them into a referendum election. But if it had been Bernie Sanders, it would have been forget about it. All of the Senate and all of the swing House candidates would have ran two campaigns. They would have ran the Trump referendum and they would have ran the I love capitalism, I'm not a socialist race, right? And that's where the danger, that would have been a disaster, dude.
You would have seen 100 ads with Joseph Stalin in them and Fidel Castro.
And they would have been run by the Democrat. Those would have been run by the Democratic campaigns. I have data I collected from 2018, and none of them, literally none. There's one. Okay, actually, I shouldn't say none. There's one Democrat that I found that ran an ad about Donald Trump. Okay, and it was Jennifer Wexton in Virginia's 10th. She ran an ad that linked Barbara Comstock to Donald Trump. Now, I did find some ads in a couple of the Senate races that talked about Donald Trump, Tester and Donnelly in Indiana, so Tester in Montana. But guess what? They talked about how they were going to work with Donald Trump. They were positive ads about Trump and how they were going to work with Donald Trump, right? Literally, if you think about that versus 2014 and how Republicans ran against Obama and the Democrats, every ad was a referendum on Obama. Every fucking ad, right? So it's going to be a great, article when it comes out because it just highlights and that's really what Michael Steele and I were talking about on their pod because he was on an interview with Tom Perez, and Tom Perez says we're going to make this election about local issues in each district, and we're not going to talk about Donald Trump. And Michael Steele falls out of his seat, and I'm at home I'm a nobody. I'm based my forecast had been released, but nobody knows who I am, and I'm yelling at the TV going, no, make it about Donald Trump, right? And Michael Steele's all right, he recovers himself and he looks over at Tom Perez and his eyes are literally rolling out of his head and he goes, well, in 2010, I was the Republican National Committee chairman and I made the election all about Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama and I picked up 63 House seats.
This idea that you run on local issues in this environment that is hyper-partisan, hyper-siloed, hyper-politicized and everything is no longer, it doesn't work anymore. No. Look, 20 years ago, I would have told you, yeah, be the guy I'm going to be the congressman from District X,
Yes.
and I'm going to fix the bridge and the roads and the water treatment plant,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm going to do. Well, now you have to be in this national fight. Social media has leveled the atmosphere so much that you can't just pretend your votes and your values reflect you and your hometown. Yeah. Now you have to be, you're called upon, no matter what, whether it's right or wrong.
I mean, unless you have the Flint water crisis, like something like that, okay? Like that's obviously got the salience and the importance to override a national theme. But other than that, and in the Democrats' mind, they talked about healthcare and they won, right? So like they think, it was the healthcare that did it. Okay, well, healthcare was the central theme of every election. Except for in 2018, Donald Trump also existed, right? So like turnout didn't bump up 15 points because of healthcare, dude. It like bumped up because Donald Trump has everybody freaking out, right? And
exactly.
That was them. Classic. It was
every Democrat understood that they got a 3 or 4 point bump in that race. Yeah. In these swing districts. Because disaffected Republican women
at least
had either literally or functionally become independents and were in the wind, and 1 or 2% of them had changed parties completely.
And I think that's why people love the Lincoln Project, because it gives them comfort, right? Because they know no matter what happens with the Biden team or with the Democratic infrastructure, someone is going to run a referendum campaign on Trump. And someone's going to do that in these Senate races too. Like someone's going to make sure Susan Collins is connected to Trump, and Cory Gardner gets connected to Trump, and Tom Tillis in North Carolina gets connected to Trump. And, there's a lot of people on that left side who have been looking at what Republicans do to win elections versus what Democrats do, and they're frustrated, right? And they're like, why can't we do some of this? It looks like it's so much more effective. And, I think it's just been such a panacea to them. I probably pronounced that word wrong. I do that. Let my working class roots show all the time. Anyway, gives them comfort, man. It's like having a fifth of whiskey every night to go to bed with, knowing out there you've got the best brilliant minds of the GOP out there, watching the back of trying to beat Donald Trump, because, it's only the fate of the free world hanging in the balance.
And I will say this, the Lincoln Project, when we came together as a group, and we've expanded, we've scaled up, as you know, very quickly. We've had a tremendous reception in several different aspects of this campaign. First off, we're closing into 1 million people interacting with us on our lists and on our socials. We're showing 10 to 12 million views now every couple of days on our media. We're out there in paid media in a bunch of the states for not only on the anti-Trump stuff, but also in the Senate races. And most importantly, what we've done, because this team works so seamlessly and we work so well to get out there in this message space, to talk to the voters we need to talk to, but also to talk to the one voter we need to talk to, and that's Donald Trump.
Yes,
the disruption of Trump's campaign. This is unique in history. This has never been done before. But we're very proud of the fact that we are able to go out there every day and get Donald Trump talking about things we want him to talk about and do things we want him to do. And it will probably never come again. You will probably never have this.
Right? I mean, because he's sitting in the American presidency, right? In the Oval Office with his fingers on the, and the fact that like he can be psychologically manipulated by, us.
There are a lot of things that led to Trump. That led this country to Trump. But Trump is sui generis in terms of how a presidential candidate or president has behaved. And so our ability to reset the political dialogue by resetting what's in his head is, like I said, it's unparalleled. We've never seen it before, but we're going to keep doing that. But we're also going to keep talking. And this is a game of small numbers. And because voter files allow you to identify people in small cohorts now and to target them very well, we're going to be out there working to win the Electoral College map for Joe Biden, because Donald Trump represents such an existential risk to the country. So we will be fighting with all the tools in the toolbox that guys like Steve Schmidt and Reed Galen and John Weaver and myself and Stuart Stevens and and Mike Madrid and Jennifer Warren, a bunch of other people that we all built up over many, many years. We understand how to talk to voters with an unparalleled degree of sophistication in terms of targeting and in terms of the emotional and evocative language and imagery that we're using, that the Trump campaign, because it's all about him, has left a very wide space for us to go in and talk to those people.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah, no, I agree. And people are so hungry, I think, to see that kind of, response and messaging, that something that's, hard hitting and holds him to account, and, shows a lot of fire in the belly, because it's a scary time, right? People are looking at this election. We're counting down the days. And I got to say, I feel nervous now in June. I can't even imagine what I'm going to feel like in September. Right? My refrain is got to be a blitz on every down, right? The last thing that people should ever become is complacent, because, as we've been talking about, the GOP, the RNC ran Trump's operation in 2016. So without any real campaign infrastructure, ultimately what happened, is a story of a few things coming together perfectly. But at the end of the day, they had a good turnout operation, and it was enough with a plurality election scenario with a lot of defection for third-party voting and, lower turnout and lack of enthusiasm for Clinton, for him to thread the needle. So it's certainly, it's an all hands on deck moment. And I'm glad to be, at least tangentially related to the Lincoln Project by serving on the board. I should probably disclose that on the interview as well. So
we like having you around.
Yeah. Well, it's a motley crew, and I'm super stoked to be involved in it.
It is what we call a pirate ship.
Yeah, it is, and it's a great place for people with loose morals and who are out of fucks to give, right?
Yeah, hang on, I've got my fuck giving out. Nope, still none.
I could talk to Rick for 5 hours, but I'm sure that my producer's okay, we got to wrap it up. So I am so excited that you joined us on the show. I am definitely going to have you back at some point and talk more and more about election stuff. But yes, thank you so much for being on, Rick. It's great. And keep on fighting the good fight for us.
We'll talk to you again soon.